Hey guys, welcome to Break the Chain. I'm really excited to announce that today I interviewed Koorosh Rassekh. He's one of the leading experts in addiction. He's also the founder of Evo Health and Wellness. He's a colleague of Gabor Maté. He's actually one of his students. If you don't know Gabor Maté, he's one of the most forward-thinking minds that there is in addiction. If you haven't seen any of the videos, check them out because they're just unbelievable. Unfortunately, in this interview, there was a few glitches because everyone's locked down, everyone's on the internet, but it's pretty good. So if you hang in there, there's so much valuable information in this interview. I learned so much in this, so if you hang in there, I promise that you're going to learn a lot. All right, well, enjoy. Welcome to Break the Chain. I'm here today with Koorosh Rassekh. He's a therapist and the founder of Evo Health and Wellness, and I think it would be fair to say that you're an expert in addiction.
It's an area I spend a lot of my time and have for quite a while. So yes.
That's wonderful news because I myself am a recovering ketamine addict, and I'd say you're probably the most expert person I've ever will have spoke to in that field. I guess I've always been quite intuitive with how I've approached battling my addiction, being as I more or less just moved to the other side of the world and then I've sort of waited it out until I've had some inspiration and direction in how to intuitively move away from that. What was it that led you to the path that you've come on with starting this movement?
So mine is a personal story as well, which goes back as far as I've been here. But really, sort of my struggle accelerated when my country, Iran, blew up, and I was a 10-year-old and landed in west coast of United States at a time where it wasn't so popular to be from that part of the world. So that was a big spike that led me to, having a lot of struggle and having to subjugate my authenticity, who I am, to get my needs met, because who I was suddenly just unacceptable in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So fast forward, that led me to adopting behaviors, substance use primarily, but also sports, also the capacity to do more than anybody else as ways of earning my relationships and earning my sort of belonging, if you want to call it that. It's what I would call it. Which eventually led me to homelessness and being cut off from family and friends and all of that. And that was the beginning of the shift for me. And then I just, a pretty lucky person. So I ended up in traditional treatment, and I sort of did treatment and recovery the same way that I used drugs and drank and did all the other things. If you would have asked me for 20, 25 years of my life, how are you doing? My response would have been, I'm always good, which is obviously an impossible state for a human being, but it's indicative of how much it was important for me to not burden you with any of my stuff so that I could have to school to become a therapist. I realized that part of what I was struggling with throughout my life was this becoming the successful business person as a way of earning my place, as opposed to being interested in doing that. And it became pretty clear in my recovery road that I'm intended to be, and I love to be a therapist, and that holds true to today. I love doing what I do. I'm made to do what I do, I believe. And then that's where, because I was in recovery, they actually assigned me the label of expert day one in recovery. And
Yeah.
so even in my graduate program and as a young therapist and just as an intern, I was already being sort of consulted. Well, what do you think? And I don't have a problem taking on that expert role, so I try to balk at it a little bit more now. So that kind of opened the door, and then all of these lucky things happened where I started to notice that, wait a minute, both my own experience and also statistically, and if we look at the segment of the healthcare industry, which is the mental health services, and then within that, the addiction treatment, we have really awful outcomes. We're not
Nothing,
doing a very
yeah,
good job.
nothing in the sort of close to home general treatment of addictions ever resonated or rang any bells for me. It was just sort of like you can't help me. I can't relate to you very much. I mean, maybe that was just my mindset of being so much in denial at the time, and actually, I probably wanted to be heavily medicated on anesthetic at the time. But one thing you said to me was at the start there was really important, I thought, and that was about not being yourself and not being your authentic self. And it comes down to shame, doesn't it? And having a low self-worth. One thing I learned is that being ashamed of who you are actually completely inhibits the production of serotonin. So if you're ashamed of yourself, you can't be happy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, shame is a huge component in people's pain. If you think about what is addiction, we have to sort of start with defining addiction. So addiction is any behavior that we crave, we think about, we're compelled towards, that gives us a reward, or it eliminates pain, that we continue to do in spite of consequences and cannot stop, even though we want to.
Yeah.
Right? So if you notice, there's nothing in that definition that has anything to do with substances. It does not have to be just substance. It can be anything. But it's this process that somebody is getting something out of this behavior. And as long as we're focusing on the behavior as opposed to the individual and what they are getting from that behavior, it's going to be a really difficult, if not impossible, riddle to solve.
Yeah.
It's what is, one of my teachers, Dr. Gabor Maté, will say, it's not the addiction. The question is not why the addiction. The question is why the pain. And if we go into why the pain, then we can solve the addiction without really ever attending to it, other than the practicals. If somebody is on opioids, their nervous system requires a certain detox and a certain stabilization and grounding. If you're using alcohol, it's life-threatening. So of course, and habits and patterns, we need to deal with those. But that's not the real treatment. The real treatment is to help folks identify what it is that they struggle with early on. These are adaptations that people make away from their true self in response to pain in their environment.
Yeah, I'm just going to, it's a real shame that it's doing this, but I'm going to go a little bit closer to the router because unfortunately it's gone a little bit glitchy a couple of times. So if people can just be a little bit patient, that would be highly appreciated.
Yes, so Dr. Gabor Maté says, it's the question isn't why the addiction, the question is why the pain. And that suggests that we need to work with the individual and their history and their story, and what is it that they get from the behavior or their use, because that's giving them something. I had the privilege of working with somebody today, and in this world gone haywire, and all of us are in it. So here we are trying to find quality router connections. I mean, that's partly because there's half the world is on their computer now, Zooms and Skypes and so forth. And this person was saying how they were noticing that they were trending towards abusing substances to try to get sleep. And when we got into it, joy came up. Substances give a temporary feeling of joy, and also relief came up. So this is a person that needed joy, levity in their life, and needs relief from the stresses of being a parent who's now become a teacher, who's become a babysitter, who's now spending more time with a spouse and kids without ever asking to do any of those things. And so it's the tendency, that thought towards using is an appropriate thought. That's what a healthy nervous system is supposed to do. It's supposed to identify a need and respond by giving you what you want. Now, you may not want to use substances or to get on a video game or to dive in, disappear into your work or eat or sex or anything like that. And so the work is to help folks identify what's happening and have a wider range of ways of attending to their needs.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I see my addiction as just the most. It was the most wonderful example of self-medication. I really found something that worked for me. It was. It wasn't for a while until I realised that actually this was the very effective temporary cure for almost every single one of my anxieties for around 6 years. But it got to the point where it was like, I'm skinny, my health was suffering seriously. I was pretty much at the point where I was like, if I keep going, I'm going to die soon, or I'm going to be permanently disabled in some way internally from what I was doing. And I'd pushed everybody away, and I had no money, and all the other wonderful things that go with being a drug addict.
That's right.
And it got to the point, it's like, well, I've experienced some things whilst using this, or in this state, like a sense of peace, joy, a temporary connection to people, and all these, what I found to be actually quite spiritual components that you would hear about through from a spiritual teacher. That it took me a long time to realise, because obviously I moved to the other side of the world, and I tried everything. I quit everything. I even quit coffee. I went vegan. I literally went full on. I literally quit everything, and I was the void inside me was so cold and empty. I just couldn't even believe it. I had the worst anxiety, probably nearly the worst I've ever had. So sobriety. I was listening to one of your videos earlier about sobriety and there needing to be another option to that. So what would you provide as an option to sobriety?
So one of the things, earlier, first of all, thank you for sharing some of your experiences with me. In this conversation and in any conversations we have, my intention is to hold your story, these kind of conversations, right? And try to solve riddles for folks that might be listening wherever. When you talk about your use to begin with, relief from multiple layers of anxiety. It sounds like it was hard. And then you also speak about getting a sense of peace, a temporary sense of connection, all of these things. Would you fault anybody from pursuing those things? Relief from unbearable pain, and connection, joy, peace, all of that? That is a sign of a healthy nervous system, even though it sounds like your experience was pretty awful. And when we talk about sobriety, yes, it's super difficult. It's not, but non-sobriety as an option is just as, if not more, difficult. It's not about what's an easier path. One of the main reasons people don't get help, and only about 10% of the population that self-reports, this isn't going the way I want it to go. Maybe not to the point where you and I were, which is sort of have lost everything. About to die kind of thing, shaky and all that, but they're still like, yeah, this is not good, but I'm okay. I can figure it out myself. They don't ask for help. One of the top reasons for that, finances is a big one, and the other one is they don't want to be sober. They don't want to give it up. Now, if you kind of had to, if the data suggested that, I'm sorry that that's the case, I would still approach it in a very different way than we do. I would approach it with a lot more compassion and love, as opposed to, the sooner that you realize you're an addict and the more completely you adopt that identity and give up any hope of joining society in that way again, that, we can begin the work. That's pretty harsh, right? Yeah. But the data doesn't actually support that. There are many people who are given a certain bit of information or have scare. A doctor says something, or a partner says I'm pregnant, or something happens. There's actually a famous 12-step person that does a lot of TED Talks. People can kind of search it. And he actually speaks about being, on crystal meth, crack cocaine, serious, checks all the boxes of addict. And then he speaks about having a dream one night of his mother seeing his dead body in a casket. That was the last time he used. It's like, okay. People have these shifts. And in many cases, in many, many cases, those people do establish a healthy relationship with one or more substances. But this idea, this story in the recovery community is so powerful around sobriety is the solution to addiction. And if you're not sober, you're just fooling yourself, that these people are silenced.
Yeah.
And I mean, in my, now coming up to 10 years of working in the way that I am working, it's amazing how many people will sort of, full of shame, be like, yeah, I don't really tell anybody, but I smoke pot every once in a while and I'm good. Or, yeah, I drink occasionally. My problem was heroin, or I had trouble with crystal meth, but, I can have a drink once in a while. And it's really funny because they're telling me a story of success. They overcame this huge obstacle in their life.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, don't tell anybody, right? And so this is why. Sorry, go ahead.
One thing. Sorry, I thought. One thing you said, I heard you say, rung so true to me. And you was talking about an addict, and they were so pissed off because it was 12 o'clock and they'd given into their addiction at 12 o'clock midday. I was like, man, I can't even make it past half a day without using. I used to use from the moment I woke up. I used to use before I got out of bed. If I made it to breakfast without using, I was pleased. But I used to use before I got out of bed, just to get out of bed, and I didn't stop until I slept, and that was every day. And I did that for 6 years straight, and more. That wasn't that serious. And I know, and one thing you said is like, man, that person has been battling since 7 o'clock in the morning, and they've been in a battle up until midday, and they won that battle, but they lost at midday, and that rang so true to me because sobriety's nasty, man. When you're coming out of addiction, sobriety really is. It's absolute suffering. It's pure pain. There's no joy. There's no light. You're in the dark. It's cold and it's dark. What? I mean, I know what I've done to get myself to where I have, sort of experimentally. What would you suggest? And I know there's no one size fits all, but what would you suggest is the sort of at the very core of this problem?
So, yes, the sobriety, particularly early sobriety, those first, depending on the substance and the severity of use, those first 2 weeks to 2 years are hell, absolute hell. There's no doubt about it. And there's good reason for that. First of all, if you're a coffee drinker, try not drinking coffee for a couple of days. Just see just how bad you feel. Headaches and bad mood and emotional dysregulation. And we're talking about substances that are much more powerful on the nervous system. And so there is that physical adjustment period. Secondly, the only reason any of us, you, me, anybody else, would sort of poison ourselves in the way that we do is that there is this huge body of pain, those things that you spoke about, that anxiety. And I'd be curious if I were working with you to go, no, well, what is that pain? What is the anxiety? Where did it come from? Anxiety essentially is some sort of a response to stimuli, external, internal, right? And so what is all of that? So all of that now comes, pouring out. Just because you stop doesn't mean that you've solved those riddles. You were solving those riddles. I was solving my riddles. There's millions of people out there getting a temporary relief from these really difficult aspects of life. And so, yes, it is hard. And so what would I recommend to people? First of all, I would say, before you just decide to go cold turkey and quit, consult somebody to find out what sort of risk are you running. I mean, are you really in physical danger coming off of substances? And is there a way to do it without having mitigating additional health problems, right? Actually, even before then, I would speak to this idea that you've had it good enough for too long. It's time to suffer and get your life together. It's actually the opposite. It's been awful your whole life, and it's time to take good care of yourself. So this road to recovery is about compassion, love, softness. I'm staunchly against any sort of tough love. Doesn't work. If it worked, maybe. Doesn't work at all. This notion of you're supposed to suffer through it. It sucks anyway, but it would be nice to to have the world around you and the world within you be gentle and kind to yourself. Then get the appropriate care. If you don't have the means, if you don't have the money to get medically assisted detoxes or to get supported detoxes of any kind, there are ways to do it that are safer than not employing those. For example, alcohol, which is one of the most dangerous ways substances to detox from. It can kill you. Well, a medical detox is recommended. And if you don't have access to a medical detox, then having somebody be with you throughout the process and titrating off, so lowering the alcohol amounts, can work. It can work, and it's much safer than just stopping, and certainly safer than stopping and being by yourself.
Yeah.
And then my recommendation is to begin to realize, and this is the key thing, this is the key pivotal point in the work that I do with folks. This is kind of the pre and the post, which is to begin to think of yourself differently. I believe addiction is an expression of self-care. You use the word self-medication. Self-medication is self-care. Self-care requires self-love. So all addiction, in my perspective, in my belief, is an act of self-love. It's awful. It's messy. It kills people. It kills people around people. I do things that I still go, God, I did that. And it's been a lot of years, right? And I don't think those cringe moments will ever go away. So I'm not suggesting that it's a pretty path. It's awfulness in so many ways. And it is a human being taking care of their needs. It is somebody trying to get through the moment, trying to get out of bed in the way that you said it. And that's just important. So when we begin to think and to be able to consider our story from another perspective, other than I'm a screw up, I made bad choices, and I got myself to where I am, and I did lots of bad things, lots of examples that I'm a bad person. It's a really difficult position to start to make meaningful change. But if you come to this place that says, oh my God, look at all the values and ethics I had to break. Look at all the hearts and promises to myself and others that I had to break just to get through a day. That's heroic. Now that is a powerful position to be able to imagine the rest of your life.
Yeah. One thing, I guess that in terms of the 12-step program, there's step 12 seems to be just the biggest part, and I can see that you're expressing that in a big way, and that's I feel like that's been my salvation as well. And what I really focus on is the sort of like the absolute core desire, and accepting, or really in the beginning trying to having to force it, but then it's sort of like transforming by itself. But like that core desire of like accepting I am not the center of everything, and then going on to being like, okay, there's so many people suffering in this world, and even if I'm a drug addict, even if I fuck up, even if I it all goes south, I bet there's still a way that I can serve another person, that I can actually be beneficial to someone else's life, and I'm going to focus on that thing, and how I can give rather than not take. And I think in Simon Sinek, he's got a book called Leaders Eat Last, and he makes it really black and white about when you serve others and when you help others, you get oxytocin, and with enough of this chemical present in your system, it actually becomes very hard to be addicted to things. So through that service, it actually prevents the addiction itself, and that is complete. That's how I've transformed my own addiction.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I agree with you. My take on the 12 steps is that it is, I don't know of any organization on the planet whose membership will attribute saving their lives to. It is amazing. It is powerful. It has some core values that it has been able to adhere to when other organizations, no matter how well intended, when they grow to the size that AA in particular, part of the 12 steps, they usually become corrupted, and AA has not. That's absolutely amazing. Yeah. And we have to see it for what it is. AA is an ideology. It's a way of thinking about people, and it can help immensely. And it does help immensely. I actually believe that AA's power to help people has been watered down in the way that we mandate and force people into a program that is supposed to be volunteered into. Any other social support organization, spiritual, religious organization, all of these sort of domains where people make sense of the human experience, we sort of, you might have advocacy, you might have people knocking on doors and saying, hey, how about this? What do you think about it? And you can choose to join it or not. And AA certainly has that advocacy. In fact, it's a part of it, right? It's part of the early, what Bill Wilson did was not to help anybody else get better. Bill Wilson got better by trying to help other people. There's a famous conversation he's having with his wife in which he says, look, I've been doing this for 6 months and I don't think I've helped one person. And his wife says, but you haven't drank in 6 months, right? So that's that act of service that you're speaking to.
Yeah.
I think AA also does not belong in the clinical world in the way that it is currently in the clinical world. I think it's fantastic to be a 12-step therapist or to deliver a 12-step treatment. Perfect. Fantastic. People can choose that. You're advertising what you do, and people who are either curious, interested, or whatever can try it out. And if they don't like it, they can try to go elsewhere. But the way that the tenets of 12-step have worked their way into the sort of the clinical gospel is problematic because they're not rooted in sound science. They're rooted in beliefs and ideology.
Yeah.
And so I think if we uncouple that, we'll actually see benefits of AA grow, and I think we'll see treatment improve. Right now, as long as we're in that, and that was part of my experience. I actually had what you might call a successful treatment experience. I went to a non-12-step science-based treatment, which was completely 12-step, 100%.
Yeah.
All of the leadership were 12-steppers. They had meetings. They just knew that if they said what they were, I wouldn't go there. And people like me would not go there.
Yeah.
But that creates this, this problem in your recovery. There's this charade that has been at the core of this process of finding your authenticity, and people that are helping you find your authenticity, but they're sort of pretending, and that's problematic.
This is something that I'm very interested in because I'm very much rooted in the spiritual side of the whole thing. I'm happy to just. I have a lot of faith, but at the same time, I know that there's so many people out there. I don't want to, give people ideas, and I know what you're saying within that 12-step program is they're really censoring it as it is. The information that they know, they're completely watering that down, and in a sense, that's sort of what I do because I know that people can't grasp ideas that I believe. Which is why the scientific side of it is so important, and to be able to actually give that to people in a logical, rational way that they can actually palate themselves. So I'd be really interested to know, sort of from your perspective, in how you would actually go through that process, start to finish.
So there are two people that whose work, and I would sort of. There's so many people, but here's two people who are part of the tip of the spear. One is Dr. Gabor Maté, and he's done a really great job putting together all of the science, and he speaks about the roots of all addiction being trauma, early childhood trauma, and this exchange between authenticity and attachment. Sort of you come into this world, when you think about our past, depending on the language that you prefer, you could talk about genetics or epigenetics, you could talk about karmas or past lives or generational resiliencies and generational vulnerabilities, traumas, whatever, right? All that means, it's all different language that means stuff that happened before you were born, potentially thousands of years before, has an impact on you today, right? And then there's everything that happens conception onward. We know that stress in the parents, particularly the mother, but mother and the father, or the mother, father, it's the unit that's in the house during the pregnancy, has a direct impact on how the nervous system develops. And so one of the very common connections between stimulant use is self-medicating of ADHD. What is ADHD? ADHD is hypervigilance. Hypervigilance in that architecture in the brain can easily begin to develop in utero, right? So there's different connections, but what it comes down to from Dr. Gabor Mate's work is that this is early life stuff, even pre-life stuff, and then you come into the world and you have needs, and then you have caregivers. And if the caregivers are able to meet your needs, when you're a baby, you're authentic. Wham, right? Yeah. I need food, I need to be cleaned, I need to sleep, I need to be burped, whatever it is. And if I need to do that every 3.5 minutes and my caregivers are down and they take care of me, my architecture begins to develop in a way that says, I'm cool, I belong here, I'm taken care of, this world is safe. Now, good parents, bad parents doesn't really matter. It's if there is a miss, if I have needs and my parents are overwhelmed and they just can't, then that attachment part, when I get my needs met, which is more important, takes over from the authenticity part, which is I have to have needs. And so even little babies, pre-verbal, pre-cognitive capacity babies begin to change. Some of the cry it to sleep stuff around babies, huge correlation between later incidences of anxiety, substance use, depression, to kids that were left alone to learn how to sleep on their own. Not because kids are learning how to sleep, because kids actually give up asking for help.
Yeah.
You imagine what that does to a nervous system, right? So here's one clinical part, which is to help folks understand that they had to adapt as young people to stimuli around them to get their needs met. And those adaptations were appropriate. What are some of those adaptations? I don't need anybody else. I can take care of myself. I am bad. I am good. Becoming hyper productive, becoming really good at things, becoming really bad at things, becoming a rebel. These are all different sort of expressions where we sort of move away from our authentic self. And then that doesn't serve us anymore at some later age, teenagers, etc., where substances become available, and now we begin to numb ourselves because it's just too difficult. In cases where we've learned possible social anxieties, things like that, substances open doors. I no longer have that inner critic that says, don't talk to them, don't talk to this, I can go after it. So there's a developmental piece here from the clinical scientific world that I would refer anybody to Dr. Maté, and there's a lot of that information on our website as well. Then there's another, also Canadian guy, Dr. Bruce Alexander, and I love the way that he really speaks about it, and he has a book called The Globalization of Addiction. I think this is the definitive work on how addiction has become a global, to use a current word, pandemic. It's an epidemic. So, he will speak that in indigenous cultures there was plenty of pain. People, they were pretty awful. They would kill kids when they would raid and so forth, and they had slaves. So it's not like we're painting a picture of pre-modern life as this utopia. They had their problems, but they really didn't have addiction. Addiction is a newer thing, right? We haven't had this issue with addiction globally like we do today. And he speaks about addiction from a social perspective. It is the untethering, he calls it the dislocation of people from who they are in a world that objectifies all of us. Objectifies us as objects of production, objects of beauty, objects of whatever. And it sort of disconnects us from who we are as part of nature, the fact that we are nature, that our culture, our heritage. And so that pain is just too great. And so we numb that pain through substances. And so clinically, the work is, I believe, and the work we do is the intersection of these two things. It's to resolve these adaptations that we've made that make it really difficult for us to get our needs met, and we use substances, and also to help people design a life and a lifestyle that makes sense to them, where they feel connected, that they develop resiliencies in their life to offset the inevitable pain of their life. So I think that's the real work, and it's all around it's all relational, and it's all about the individual in relationship with the world around them.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding that, it's sort of like from the trauma when you're very young, you get a sense that, you know, you have to do it by yourself, and it causes a sense of centeredness in the sense that they don't want or need anything else around them, which essentially completely disconnects you from everything else, and you're just never going to have a common cause. I mean, what's interesting that I've observed through this pandemic now is that immediately, as soon as initially there was some fear, and everybody sort of got real protective and a bit sort of weird, but then as soon as they sort of got past that, everybody that's going past this house here is waving, just like, you know, they're just like desperate for some connection. Everybody's putting out teddy bears, they're writing nice things everywhere because they've got a common enemy, and they're connected. Mm-hmm. They're connected through this commonality now. And the same as like a long time ago, there were so many external threats that you had to sort of be tribal to protect from this threat outside, and you always had a purpose and something that you should that needs to be done. Like there's people relying on you, and now that everything's so comfortable, everybody's, you know, essentially that people's main business now is sense enjoyment. They're just going after, you know, figuring out how to make themselves happy through one way or another, because there's no sort of, there are many external threats, but, you know, generally everything's quite comfortable and there's nothing sort of major often. Certainly in my world, there's not anyway, in most of the people's worlds that I know. So it does seem like that common, even if it is an enemy, but hopefully there's something, hopefully it doesn't need to be an external enemy, but I believe that it's an internal enemy, and that self-centeredness is that thing that can connect us, because we all suffer from that self-centeredness. I believe that we can all connect through that. We can connect through trauma, and we can connect through suffering. And I've seen when people, I'm sure you see it, when people come together, and this is one thing that I really try to promote people to do, because everybody, including me, is so apprehensive to do it. But it's like, go to the AA meeting. You know, go hang out with some people who are going through what you're going through, and they don't. And I didn't. I just suffered in anxiety by myself. But I mean,
yeah. And if you think about this self-centeredness, think about where it came from, you know, a bunch of men, and actually successful men. That's who they were. Part of what was happening with them is they made a bunch of money, then they lost it. It was Bill Wilson's story. And even today, that is a very big part of what we see. And if you sort of think about, well, okay, what is self-centeredness? And what, you know, if we go one step farther, and the word we use clinically might even be narcissistic, right? The world revolves around me and my needs. Now, I'm not suggesting people that are having a tough time with these kind of behaviors are all narcissistic. It's not it. But what I am going to say is, if we think about, there is one period of time in our lives where being completely narcissistic, completely self-centered is appropriate. And that is that early life window, right? I don't know if you're around little kids or if you're familiar with that, but when they don't even have the brain architecture to consider other people, they just don't. Yeah. There's only one way to interpret the world. And again, through the lens of Dr. Gabor Maté and developmentalists like him and I firmly believe in this, and the evidence is overwhelming to support it. That you can get stuck in that space. That, in a way, when your stress comes up, and you see this working with people, is they kind of revert to these early versions of themselves, who are, so there's a piece of being stuck in that's that adaptation that shows up even as adults. And so this, you know, we see it in some of the leadership of the world right now, who are, you know, coming completely, even right now with the pandemic as it is, they're interpreting that as this is some sort of a conspiracy against my rule or my election, and so this is, you can make a pretty clear connection between that early life trauma during that time in which being completely self-centered is appropriate, and that self-centeredness continuing into even old age.
Yeah, I've suffered firsthand and I'm sure other people have suffered from me firsthand, because of these things. I find these things really hard to riddle out in myself and to understand. I feel like there's just there's a curtain in front of that I can't see past. As soon as it comes to actually getting through that, it all comes back to that shame and that trauma that you have to do so much work to actually unpack. And I I feel like I get quite frustrated with not understanding why I am the way I am, and then I have to remember to forgive myself. And the more I go through life and the more things I experience, I do feel like these things do become apparent. I have these like stages of realization where it's like, oh, that's what that is. Did you have that, or did you with your own experiences go through a process with professional help to understand those things?
Oh my God, yes, and I continue to. This is a journey, and add some insecurity and add some stress, bad night's sleep, and I can all sorts of versions of me can come out at any given day, and that can be being withdrawing and punishing in my family, and aggressive and tantruming. I try to catch it earlier and try to make it less often. And I'm glad that it's not in the same way that it was. But I think these are, this might be a limit in my professional abilities, but I actually don't believe you overcome. I think what you can do is change your relationship with them. I no longer think that I'm bad because I have a bad parenting moment or a bad partner moment. I recognize that happened for a reason. I was scared. An old story came up. For me, it's worth that I make bad decisions, and I will never be happy, and all of that. So all of that tidal wave of stuff comes in, and in that moment, now I'm 3 again, stomping, and all the ways that I do it, and we all do. And so that requires love and care and the ability. And this is one of the areas where 12 step is fantastic. And I think therapists would do well to learn how to approach repairing in the way that the 12 steps teach people to do an amends instead of an apology. Because amends is just another apology. It's a process that which you try to limit, if not eliminate, the need to make that same apology again, right? I think that's fantastic. So it's to be able to go to my partner or to my kid or to my colleague, or in some cases to my clients, and say, you know what? When this happened, that happened to me, and then I hurt you. I was mean to you, or I was, I whatever it is. And I'm sorry I did that. You didn't deserve that. Yeah. And that's, I think that's the key, is to change your relationship with those moments where those things happen, so that they don't just become more evidence of how messed up you are. That wasn't true to begin with. It's never true. I guess I should have said this at the beginning, but all of my work is rooted in an absolute belief in the beauty and the perfection of everybody.
Yeah.
Not the sameness, and not to say that we don't do terrible, terrible things. Not to even say that some people should not be sequestered away from the general population for the safety of the general population. I don't believe in the legal system and the prison system in the way that it is. I think it's awful. But it's like an animal that's sick. The animal isn't sick because it wants to be sick. It's not going to bite you because you deserve to be bit, but it's going to bite you because it's sick.
Yeah.
And some of us humans have that capacity too.
I think that we can act. We can make the choice to whether we act as humans or as animals. I think that we have the capacity to act on an animal level, and I think many people do, unless they sort of decide that they want to be conscious. I believe that my drug addiction was an animal, instinctive decision. I don't think that I was in that moment. I was choosing to be ignorant. I was choosing not to know. I was choosing to be unconscious. I think you have to make the choice to actually be conscious and want to see what's going on. And when people don't, they're dangerous.
Here, without arguing with you, I'm not going to argue with you, but I will I will not collude with that story.
Okay.
I think that you just don't seem to me. We've only had a brief conversation, and maybe I haven't talked to you for long enough, but it just doesn't seem to me like that. Given a choice, you would have chosen where you were. It sounds pretty awful where you were. I think. I think given the circumstances of your life, you ended up where you were, and it's not where you wanted to be. It certainly doesn't sound like you want to be there again, nor are you headed there right now,
It
which is
was.
great.
It was that. It wasn't that I was choosing what was happening. It was that I was choosing not to be in pain, and
That's
then
right.
and then everything unfolded from that choice.
That's right.
And that's
And
when, that's why everything became so compulsive, is because it's like this is the only thing I knew how to deal with that.
that's right. And that is the appropriate choice. It is the appropriate choice to not be in pain. There is a complication that's really, really important for any parents, I think, right now that have emerging teenagers. This is a really important piece that is so grossly overlooked. Particularly the adolescent period is a time, along with all of these other things that we do as we grow up. One of the things we also do is learn how to deal with pain, disappointment, really, really, really wanting a friendship or the object of our sexual attraction or a certain identity or whatever it might be, and not getting it and being crushed, and getting into our sort of romantic relationships and then having those betrayed and end, and just, yeah, oh my God, that's so terrible. Because what we also learn in those experiences is that they end. And if kids, and when kids have sufficient amount of pain and access, I actually think much more than substances, these guys here, and iPads more than these, schools give them to all the kids, right? Um, because they are such effective painkillers, one of the things that is happening is people have access to painkillers, which by that I mean distraction. That's all a painkiller is. Opioids don't solve pain. They just make it so you can't feel it. You're disconnected from it. Devices do a very similar thing. And so what happens is kids learn that at any site of pain, I need a painkiller. And there isn't a trust in yourself that you can manage the experience. This is not a sort of a hidden suggestion for you specifically, but it is a thing that happens. And that's really difficult because now you have somebody who's trying to get their life back on track, but they don't know, and they have to learn how to endure pain. That it actually is just like a wave in the ocean. It comes, and it has a peak, and it goes away, and there's calm after that. And that actually applies to depression and anxiety and all of those things as well. They're not constant.
Yeah, I definitely recognised that in myself. That essentially I was a heavy dopamine addict. Finding these things through substances and looking at, I don't know, porn or any phone, scrolling through my phone, and I recognised that. And then I looked around and I thought, you know what? Everybody else is the same as me. Everybody's doing the same thing, and they're just trying to avoid
That's
discomfort
right.
one way or another. And it's like, all right, well, actually, that's been a really good thing to know, because I feel fully connected with all of you now, and I want to find a solution for all of us. I'm not labeling myself as a ketamine addict, or him as an alcoholic, or them as a sex addict. I'm just seeing everybody with the same problem now. That alone was really soothing for me to find that out.
Yeah. Yeah, we're people, humans, before we're any of those things. And what do we all want? We all want the same stuff. And if you talk to anybody, including what you said today, I share those exact sentiments, um, whether it's devices or substances or whatever else it might be. It is in pursuit of connection. It is in pursuit of joy, that oxytocin that you referred to, uh, serotonin, dopamine production that come from feeling connected, from even having the ability to feel like you belong, that you have a purpose, that you have some value and worth, all of those things. And that's, for some people, that's taken away. and these behaviors and substances help them get that feeling for a moment. For others, there's just a huge amount of pain. Really awful things that have happened that haunt them, continue to haunt them. And so getting loaded is a way, getting distracted is a way to keep all of that at bay and get through the day. That's what we're actually kind of designed to do.
Do you think like obsessing over your negative, what you define to be negative traits of your personality, whether it be your addiction or whatever it is about yourself that you don't like, and sort of really putting that under a microscope and obsessing over that is healthy? Or do you think it's more as part of the healing process to accept that and to then focus on the positive?
So when you use the word obsessing, right, there's, exploration, insight, being, sort of having mechanisms, whether it's through mindfulness or, different practices that help with grounding and all of that, fantastic. But when you get into obsessing about something is, being in your thoughts, being in your mind is another form of escapism. Can be anyway. Anything can be. There's nothing that's not available for the object of escapism, addiction, if you want to call it that. So yes, if this moment is impossible for me, and I can just obsess about some aspect of myself, and time passes by, sure, that's no longer sort of. I wouldn't call that now a healthy process. In the same way that if you choose work as your object of distraction, and you work, and you make tons of money, right? The world might say, wow, nice job. That's really great. But you're tearing up your body, your organs, your relationships, all of those same things, because it's not a healthy, balanced part of your life. It's a way that you're escaping other pain. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, one of the examples I use with folks is a very simple thing like a headache, right? If you just wake up with a headache, what is it that you do to solve a headache? Do you get headaches?
No.
You don't get headaches.
Take care of yourself.
Yeah, so if somebody that does wake up, they take Tylenol, Excedrin, Aleve, something, right? They take something, and a couple hours later, the headache goes on. Once a year, you get, the only thing you have to do is look to see if your medicine is expired or not. But if every time the headache wears off, you need to take more Excedrin. Excedrin has caffeine in it. It works really well for a headache. But now over a couple of days, you're not going to sleep very well because of the caffeine. So you're solving your headache, but now you're not sleeping. It also inhibits your appetite. So your nourishment becomes a problem after about a week or 10 days, right? But every time you stop taking it, you get a headache again. But then the next thing that happens is your headache may start resolving itself. You don't know. But because you're so used to taking Excedrin, when you don't take Excedrin, you get a Excedrin headache, right? So this is the pattern that people get to. But what we have to go to is, why the headache? We don't solve Excedrin. We have to go, what was it that made you get a headache to begin with? Maybe you live in a house that has asbestos. Then you move to a different house and you no longer have headaches.
Yeah.
Do you still have an Excedrin problem? Right? This, I think, is a way that we need to begin to think about in a much more complex way, addiction. We have to begin to think about it as a person that needs support. And so if you're finding yourself, or anybody's finding themselves obsessing about something, right, is that Excedrin? Is the obsessing Excedrin?
Yeah.
If it is, then what is it that's causing that? If it's a part of your reflection, if it's a part of your way of, sort of being thoughtful about your life and who you are and what drives you, then yeah, fantastic. Absolutely great.
Yeah. Get to the root, get to the source.
Yeah, curiosity.
Yeah.
And the best way to be curious is through compassion. If at the end of every exploration there's a stick that you can beat yourself up with, you're going to stop exploring pretty soon.
Yeah.
Right?
To me, this thing became all, obviously not delving into the trauma and stuff, and shame, that's so complicated, and, you can go neurotic pretty fast thinking about that stuff. But for me, just as a general black and white rule, All this dopamine thing, that's all taking. That's me trying to escapism, distraction, whatever
Sure.
it is. It's me just looking around at this world, like what can I take from this? What's going to make me feel good? And then flip that on its head and just be like, okay, what can I give? What can I give to
Yeah.
this world around me? And as soon as I start thinking about what I can bring to this world, what I can give, I actually don't even know what's going on with me. It doesn't matter. I've put that aside, and for better or for worse, actually I start to feel good. I'm not in
Right.
my own head. I'm not thinking, and actually it's not just me that starts to benefit. Not me that benefits from that, but everybody else starts to benefit from that as well. And it's just began
Right.
this beautiful process that's just unfolding, and actually I feel better, and my self-worth has risen. I don't feel shameful, and these things are just just simply through me thinking, how can I give? This whole process has begun, and it's been my salvation. This process,
Beautiful.
yeah,
Bravo and beautiful. And what that makes me think of is this concept of interdependence, and the reality that as human beings, we are completely interdependent. If you go to the spearhead of neuroscience, Dr. Dan Siegel at UCLA, and his institute called the Interpersonal Neurobiology, and they've consolidated all of the brain science, the lion's share of the brain science, and was sort of the tip of human development is that there is no I. Our I develops as a we. And we kind of knew this. The developmentalists figured this out when Skinner did his experiments, and they were trying to figure out what would you be if you didn't have any influences. They thought everything was what you saw around the world, and so they isolated kids, and they all died. It's like, oh, we can't do that anymore.
yeah,
It's terrible. But we knew this. We knew this a long time ago. There is no I without the we, and so this concept of interdependence is really huge. And I think that's what comes up for me when you talk about it. And it is absolutely, I mean, rock solid scientific literature that the more we recognize that we are one, you are you and I am me, and my story matters and your story matters, and it's important for us to give time and curiosity to each other. One, we're all part of this beautiful, scary, it's wacky. We are, as human is wacky, right? This gangly thing, we don't balance all that well. We can't run very fast. We can't climb very well. We can't fly at all. Swimming is a thing. We get older, everything starts sagging. This hair gets thicker, this hair gets thinner. We stuff stuff in here and it comes out there.
yeah.
It's weird.
It's
And
well
we're
weird.
capable of such beauty and amazing things, but we're also capable of such awful, horrible things. It's just human.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing. I think I heard someone say that the human mind is the most complicated and wonderful thing in the entire material creation of this entire universe. The human mind is literally the most complex thing. There's nothing more complex, and it's quite fascinating and amazing that we have the pleasure of having one of those to use and to play with. It's really cool.
Yeah, it
Yeah, man.
is. It is.
I'll see how long we've gone there. Yeah, we've done an hour. I think that's. I'm so honoured to have been able to speak to you today. It really is amazing that you spend your time, take your time to have conversations like this, and I really appreciate it. It's a shame that it's gone a little bit glitchy today. I hope that everybody managed to get the information out of that they wanted, and like I say, thank you so much. If you enjoyed that, and if you haven't checked out Koorosh before on YouTube, please do go and check that out, because you've got some amazing videos on there. Koorosh Rassekh. I'll put a link in the description for that one. Gabor Maté as well, just unbelievable. And I think you say you was his student.
Yeah, I still am a student and have been, and then I'm fortunate to also be able to call him a colleague. And if people are interested, my company is Evo Health and Wellness .com, and Gabor is actually one of our advisors. So He's our key advisor. So my work is closely tied with his, and he's just one of the best.
Yeah.
I appreciate your willingness to have me on. I hope there's something that in our conversation that is helpful to folks that are listening. Sort of just one thought that I would share is, there's a lot of people out there that would love to try to help the people that are having a tough time, that are not interested in imposing our ideas on you, but rather curious about your ideas and helping you get to your own goals. And so if you're having a tough time out there, try to seek out one of those folks that are there to try to help you live the life you want to live, and not force you into a life they think you ought to live.
That's beautiful. Yeah, man, I totally agree. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You bet.
See you
Bye-bye.
later. Cheers, man.